The call sent officers straight to the home of Robert Berdella, a man who owned a shop called Bob's Bizarre Bazaar. People who knew him described him as eccentric but harmless, someone who collected odd sculptures, books, and unusual decor. Nothing about him suggested what police were about to find. When officers reached the house, the front door was cracked open. The lights were on. The place smelled like bleach and old food. In the bedroom, they found ropes, syringes, blood-stained bedding, and a notepad filled with handwritten entries about the man who had escaped. Each line described an injury or a restraint, written in short, clinical phrases that matched the wounds on the victim's body. Detectives followed the evidence deeper into the house. Every room reflected control. Furniture was pushed aside to make space for restraints. Cabinets held drugs, tranquilizers, sedatives, and injections meant to keep a person conscious but helpless. Polaroids were stacked in boxes and drawers, each showing men bound and injured, photographed at different stages of captivity. Some were alive in the images, some had clearly died. Investigators realized quickly that this was not a single assault. It was a pattern. Berdella had grown up in Ohio, isolated and angry, a boy who did well in school but struggled socially. By the time he reached adulthood, he lived a double life. To the public, he was a talkative shop owner with a taste for the unusual. In private, he nurtured urges for domination and control. When he moved to Kansas City and bought the house on Charlotte Street, he created a place where those urges could operate without witnesses. Starting in 1984, he began luring young men inside, runaways, sex workers, men who needed money or a couch to sleep on. Once inside, they were drugged, stripped, and restrained. The first victim investigators identified was Jerry Howell, who disappeared in July 1984. Months later, the next man vanished. Robert Sheldon. Then came Mark Wallace, James Ferris, Todd Stoops, and Larry Pearson. The gaps between disappearances kept anyone from seeing the pattern. Each man was vulnerable, disconnected from family, or living on the margins of the city. When they vanished, their absences were chalked up to instability or travel. Police didn't know the victims were being held in Berdella's home, where he took notes on their suffering as if he were documenting an experiment. The notes, later recovered by detectives, described acts that were slow, deliberate, and designed to break a person's will. Berdella wrote about injections meant to paralyze. He wrote about beatings. He wrote about the moments when victims fought back or begged. When a man finally weakened beyond what Berdella could reverse, he killed him, usually by strangulation. He then dismembered the bodies in the basement and disposed of the remains in trash bags left for weekly pickup. No one noticed. No one asked why the bags were heavier or why they smelled different. Trash was taken away, and the evidence went with it. For years, Berdella balanced his two worlds. In the mornings, he opened his shop and chatted with customers. In the afternoons, he cooked meals, walked his dog, and answered the phone with the ease of a man who had nothing to hide. At night, he returned to the basement, where a restrained man waited. His ability to appear ordinary was part of what allowed the murders to continue. People saw what they expected to see, a quirky shop owner, nothing more. The break came when Larry Pearson gathered the courage to run. He had spent days handcuffed, beaten, and shocked. He watched Berdella's movements and memorized the moments when the man grew careless. When Berdella left the room to answer the phone, Pearson lunged for a window, threw his weight against the glass, and tumbled onto the roof of the porch. He hit the ground hard, but he stayed conscious long enough to reach the street. His escape saved his life and uncovered the fate of 6 others. After Berdella's arrest, detectives spent weeks cataloging the evidence inside the house. They found human remains in storage containers. They found more photographs than they could count. They found ropes still tied in loops, syringes loaded with chemicals, and notebooks that charted the final days of each victim. As investigators matched Polaroids to missing person cases, the full scope of the crimes emerged. Berdella had hunted in plain sight, choosing men whose disappearances wouldn't spark manhunts. In the months after the case broke, investigators interviewed dozens of people who had crossed paths with Berdella without realizing how close they had been to danger. Some had visited his home to buy antiques. Others had accepted rides from him or shared meals with him during street fairs. A few remembered seeing young men enter the house but never seeing them leave. Those small memories, harmless at the time, gained weight when placed against the timeline of the murders. Reporters descended on Charlotte Street, filming the exterior of the house where the crimes had unfolded. Former customers of his shop described him as intense, sometimes odd, but never threatening. That contrast made the story harder for Kansas City to process. There had been no warning signs loud enough to cut through the distractions of daily life. His victims blended into the background of a city already stretched thin by poverty and addiction. Their disappearances had not triggered the urgent searches that might have connected the dots sooner. When police reviewed his financial records, receipts, and phone logs, they found no signs of a broader conspiracy or outside help. Everything pointed to a single man acting alone, sustained by the belief that no one would challenge him. That belief ended the moment Larry Pearson hit the pavement and found help. His escape turned years of hidden cruelty into a public case, one that forced the city to confront how easily someone can exploit the vulnerable when no one is watching closely enough. When he finally faced charges, Berdella confessed to 6 murders to avoid the death penalty. He received multiple life sentences and was sent to prison, where he died in 1992 from a heart attack. Kansas City was left to reconcile the fact that one of its quietest residents had been a serial killer whose crimes spanned 3 years without detection. For the families of the victims, answers came with the cost of knowing what their sons endured. The city held memorials. Detectives kept copies of the files as reminders of how brutality can hide behind everyday routines. And neighbors who once nodded at Berdella across their yards now remembered that the house where he lived had been a prison. Thank you for listening to Homicide Files. Subscribe for more true crime stories.